Yeah, we're in still Perek, which is about Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. And again, the Gemara makes a point that Bekitzer, that Rav Chaim of Volozhin is Marichan, very, very much in the Nefesh HaChaim. It's one of the main ideas, that although Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are a shleimus of your mitzvah, but one has to know that the mitzvah is more important, and the kavanos are of secondary importance. Meaning to say, the mitzvah without kavana counts for something. The kavana without the mitzvah counts for nothing. And therefore, although avada, one has to understand that without avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, their mitzvos are very, very defective. But l'chol hapachos, they count for something. Now again, the specific thing, this was addressed against certain shitas in early Chasidus that emphasized the pnimius was more important than the chitzonius, and therefore they said, l'mashal, kriya shema, shelo bizman, if you can have more kavana, that's more important. So essentially, the Graz Hashkafa, the Nefesh HaChaim, is to go connect that idea. But again, this whole Perek is about the importance of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. It's not that the Gra is saying all that matters is superficially doing the Pa'ula, but he says that's your starting point. If you don't have the Pa'ula, you don't have anything at all. Once you have the Pa'ula, so you then work on Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, like the Lashon of the Zohar, that Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are the wings, like a bird, the wings that bring your mitzvahs to Shamayim. Now the Balatanya himself, by the way, follows the same shita as the Gra and the Nefesh HaChaim. So even from the Hasidic side, you see the same thing, and he makes the point that wings are not the main body of the bird. The wings are an appendage to the main body of the bird, and therefore the mitzvos are the guf, and the ava v'yira are the wings. Of course, this is the source actually of an old Hasidic joke that used to be said against the Misnagdim. And that is, the Baal Shem Tov walked into a Misnagid show, and he said, "Hi, this room is so filled with Torah and mitzvahs. I'm choking. I can't even move. Torah and mitzvahs are stuffing every inch here." So the Misnagdim thought that was a great compliment. He said, "Yeah, because none of it goes to Shemayim. Without Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, it all stays on earth. So it's crowded in here." He said, it doesn't go up to Shemayim. Okay. Now, then we're up to Sif Beis. Sif Beis says, "Hamarbim lasos mitzvahs." A person does many mitzvahs. He's always looking for mitzvahs. V'einam shesulim al palgei mei haTorah v'yira. But he's not planted, shasul. He's not planted on the well springs of Torah and Yiras Shamayim. Aleihem nemar, on such people, it is said in the pasuk that Hashem says, "Lama li roiv zivchechem." Remember, this is the teichacha. Hashem tells Yeshayahu, "Lama li," who needs all of their karbanos? Now, who is Sif Beis talking about? See, Sif Beis is not talking about the same problem as Sif Aleph. Sif Aleph was a discussion of people who work on Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, but they're not medayek in the halachas. So the point of Sif Aleph was that you got to keep the halacha. Without keeping the halacha, you don't have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You cannot just focus on your inner spiritual state, like people say they want to be spiritual. But to be Mekosher to Hashem, you have to keep His Torah, right? That's the point of Sif Aleph. And again, I want to point out that sometimes you hear these things and you think, well, isn't that obvious? The truth is, it's obvious only because the Nefesh HaChaim and the Gra said it, meaning to say there was a time where it wasn't so obvious. And maybe even today, it's not 100% obvious. But that's always the problem we have when we learn classic Svarim. We're wondering, what's the Chiddush here? But the answer is, this classic Sefer created that Chiddush, so then it becomes part of regular Yiddishkeit. But it indeed was a Chiddush. So that's the point of Sif Aleph, that you got to follow the halacha, and the internal spiritual state is not enough. Now, Sif Beis is already talking about a person who's following halacha, because it says, Hamarbim lasais mitzvahs. In other words, this is not talking about the guy who misses him on Kriya Shema because he wants devekus, by having more kavanah. So who is this talking about? This is talking about a person who keeps the mitzvahs, but it's not planted, so to speak. It's like a tree, but the tree is not getting its water. It's not getting its water from the waters of Torah and Yiras. Let's split this up into two things. In other words, he's doing mitzvahs, but it's not planted on the rivers or on the water of Torah. So what's the point here? So again, it's not clear exactly what this sentence means, but one point is that he's referring to people who think, all I have to do is mitzvos, and I don't have to learn Torah. Learning Torah is not important. I have a rabbi, I can ask all my shilas, or even if I don't have a flesh and blood rabbi, I have Rabbi Google, who's one of the biggest Gedolei HaPoskim, or Rabbi Chat, AI Chat, whatever it is, even better. So what do I have to learn if anything comes up, So on this, the Gra is affirming that even if you're doing a lot of mitzvahs, if you're not mechuber to some type of limud ha-Torah, it's as if you're creating a tree that is not being watered. The Torah is the water that gives nourishment to all of your avodas Hashem. So on that level, he could just be referring to the idea that people have to incorporate Torah into their lives. Now, once again, in Eretz Yisrael, in the yeshiva world, that's kind of understood. That's what we do. But once again, this is not always a davar pashut ma'id. I mean, there are many, 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 many Orthodox Jews in the United States who are, Shomer Shabbos. Maybe they even go to minyan every day. Although if they don't learn, it's not so likely, but they might. But they have mamish no connection to Limud HaTorah. They don't understand the importance of Limud HaTorah. Or their definition of Limud HaTorah is they go to a short shir on Shabbos. And that's it. Now, I'm not here to criticize them because there may be all sorts of reasons why that happened. It may have happened because Pashut, they were never exposed to yeshiva. Especially older people in America. I mean, if they go back in those days to the 30s or earlier, if they were growing up, there were very few yeshivas. There were no day schools. There were afternoon Talmud Torahs, but not everybody went to them. So that's one issue. They weren't exposed. The other issue is that maybe they were exposed, and that was the problem. They got burned in yeshiva. That they weren't treated properly. Maybe they had undiagnosed learning disabilities, which indeed, I still have a memory from the time I was in first grade, quite a long time ago, where I had a good friend who actually lives in Shelaima now, and he was a smart kid. I knew he was smart because, anything we did together, he was always smart, but he couldn't read. And I was wondering, why can't he read? I remember, he says, he's a smart guy, why can't he read? It turns out he had dyslexia. But in those days, a long time ago, they didn't necessarily have diagnoses for these things. So whether it's dyslexia, whether it's ADD, attention deficits, there are a lot of reasons. Or just the insensitivity of Rebbeim, we have to take responsibility sometimes. So, or maybe Gemara was not the thing for him. Maybe it should have been Chumash and Halacha, or Mishnah. So the point I'm making is, there are a lot of reasons why a person, even if they're religious, might be meruchak from Limud HaTorah. As they say, it might be because they didn't have the exposure, or it might be they had the exposure and it was negative. It might be insensitivities. It might be we were not makayim chanoch lanar al pidarko, to train a person according to their personality. But me'eza tam she'iyah, they could be very menutak, very severed from the Torah. So the Gra is saying that ultimately, even if you can't blame somebody for that, but ultimately there is a chisaron in their avodah, because it is not being nurtured by the well springs of Torah. And therefore we have to find a way, or every person has to find a way, in which their mitzvah observance is also going to be connected with some type of learning. Now again, Talmud Torah is not identical to Gemara. Gemara is not the only kiyum of Talmud Torah. There may be other types of things the person can learn. But even so, find something that you can learn. They have wonderful services now. They have partners in Torah, in which you could name your subject, and you can get a telephone or a Zoom, or I imagine even a live chavrusa. It's a neighborhood that you can learn anything you want. There's another one, Chavrusa Match, a different organization that does kind of the same thing. You literally say, I want to learn Derech Hashem. I want to learn Hebrew. I want to learn Nach. I want to learn Kabbalah. Right? They'll find you somebody. So, in a sense, it's an interesting thing that we're kind of losing our excuses. Meaning to say, for so many years, a person had an excuse, can't find a Rebbe, things are not translated in English. What do you want? I live in an out of the way place. There aren't teachers here. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So Hashem in His Chesed has created so many opportunities now. Long distance, Zoom, internet, translations, online, recordings, YouTubes, whatever it would be. That's why Rebbe Yashiv, even though some people are very much against the internet, say not allowed to use it, Rebbe Yashiv never signed a ban against the internet. And he said that he cannot sign a ban against the internet because although it can be misused in a lot of bad ways, either mamish bad ways or certainly bittul zman ways, but he says, how can he answer something that can be a great medium for Harbatzas Torah? So it's like anything. You can drive a car and kill yourself or kill other people. But we're not going to asher cars or buses or whatever it is because it's a kli that can be used for good things or for bad things. So Rabbi Yashiv held the internet was the same thing. That's why Or Sameach, right? We post, right? Torah anytime Or Sameach, right? We post things, right? So I'm going to give you a speech against the internet, and that's going to be put on Torah anytime, right? So the point is this, though. The point is that Baruch Hashem, going back to what the Gemara says, this enables the idea of taking a person who cares about mitzvos, but didn't have the background or the opportunity to learn Torah, that Baruch Hashem, there can now be a connection to Torah learning. Problem is that sometimes people don't realize that that's important, meaning in some ways, you first have to come to a recognition that learning is important. Then you seek out the opportunity. If you don't have the thought that learning is important, you're not going to think, you're not going to think there's a problem. You're not going to think there's something you have to fix. Right? I mean, the guy who's not learning is not likely to encounter the Evan Shelaima's statement that your Avodah without a connection to Torah learning is not being fed by the waters of Torah, because he's not going to come across this Sefer if he's not committed to learning. So that's an issue that when you go into Chinuch, you go into Rabbanos, you need to be aware of trying to reach people in that particular way. So in a sense, it's very, very interesting that, if I digress for a moment, the 15th of Av is said to be the happiest, together with Yom Kippur, the happiest day of the year. And the Gemara in Tainus gives 6 reasons. I'm not going to go over all the reasons, but I want to go over one of the reasons. And it says, because Hoshea ben Elah was the last king of the 10 tribes. And under his reign, which was under 100 years before the Churban, the Assyrians exiled the 10 tribes, right? The lost 10 tribes. So, Yeravim ben Nevat was the first king, and he put up armed guards so that Yidden wouldn't be able to go to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash. And those armed guards remained for hundreds of years. Hoshea ben Elah finally said, I'm lifting the restrictions. Anybody who wants to go to the Beis HaMikdash can go. Freedom of access to the Beis HaMikdash. And we have a Messiah that happened on the 15th of Av. So it's a great simcha, because Yidden have the freedom to go and serve Hashem. So the Gemara asks the obvious kasha, frek the Gemara, if the Yidden had the opportunity to serve, And he was a righteous person because he took away the guards. So why did the Assyrians, why was there the Churban of the 10 tribes? So the Gemara says, well, good news and bad news. The good news is he took away the guards, so anybody who wanted to go to the Beis HaMikdash could go. The bad news is nobody went. Meaning, all the years, Hashem knows the truth anyway, but all the years that people didn't go, they have an excuse. I can't go. There are armed guards. But once the armed guards are taken away and you still don't go, you don't have an excuse. The Midas Hadin then comes. Which means opportunity is both a joy and a responsibility. Meaning when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you opportunities to serve Him, that's a wonderful thing. But it's also a little bit of a frightening thing because it takes away a lot of the excuses that you might have, right? So 50 years ago, somebody could say, oh, I don't have a flesh and blood teacher in my city. I live in a small town. Or all of the Svarim are in Hebrew and they're not translated well. Right? Those are my excuses. Now, as I say, we have HeartScroll, other translations. We have Partners in Torah. We have online shiurim. So it's the simcha of the 15th of Av, in which we now have access to Avodas Hashem. But that creates a tremendous achrayus if we don't take advantage of what we have. That was why the 10 tribes were exiled. That is why they were destroyed. Because although he took away the guards, nobody went to the Beis HaMikdash. So that's the first thing, that if your mitzvos are not connected to Limud HaTorah, the analogy is, it is like a tree that is not being watered. So what happens is, the tree could survive for a little bit, but then the tree dies. Now, then he mentions two things, Palgei Torah, V'hayira. The wells, not the well, the water, the springs of Torah, which we're translating as Limud HaTorah, and Yira in the writings of the Gra, and Rav Salanter as well, is often a synonym for Musar, meaning working on your midos. So we're addressing two problems here. The guy that says, oh, as long as I'm doing mitzvos, I don't have to learn Torah. Or the other thing, as long as I'm doing mitzvos, I don't have to work on my midos, or whatever it is. In both cases, the Gra says that the Torah and the Yira are the palgei mayim that keep your mitzvos fresh and vibrant. So in this connection, I may have mentioned this before, and I may say it Friday night, but let me just mention a word from the Chafetz Chaim. In this week's Parsha, we talk about Yaakov struggling with the angel of Esav who wants to destroy him. And they're fighting throughout the night, and in the morning, the angel, Yaakov is winning. Yaakov pins him down, and the angel gives him a bracha. He changes his name from Yaakov to Yisrael. So the Chafetz Chaim says, why do we find only in the case of Yaakov that an angel tries to destroy him? Why don't we find a similar type of confrontation in the life of Avram and Yitzchak? Why is it only Yaakov that the angel of Esav or the Kayach of Ra tries to destroy? So the Chafetz Chaim says it's Yadua. Perek Avos tells us, Al Shleisha Devarim Ha'elam Aimed, the world stands on three pillars, Al HaTorah, V'al HaAveda, V'al Gemilas Chasad. Of course, this is the statement of Shimon HaTzadik, right? Our street, Shimon HaTzadik says, Al Shleisha Devarim Ha'elam Aimed. Now it's also Yadua that each of the Avos represents one of those pillars. Avram Avinu represents the pillar of Chesed, Gemilas Chasadim. Yitzchak, who was a Korban, represents the pillar of Aveda. And Yaakov, who spent 14 years without sleep in the yeshiva of Shem V'Ever, represents Torah. So, The world stands on three pillars. That's very important. It doesn't only stand on Torah. It stands on Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. But says the Chafetz Chaim, although the world needs all three pillars, Torah is the most important of the three. And the reason is because Torah can bring you to the other ones in a way that the other ones cannot bring you to Torah. So when I learn Torah, so I know I have to daven, I have to do chesed, because that's what the Torah teaches me. Masha'en came, if I'm Isaac in Mitzvos, that's not going to put the knowledge in my head. So the Chafetz Chaim says the following. The Chafetz Chaim says, the Yetzer Hara, the angel of Esav represents the Yetzer Hara, powers of evil. They are a strategic thinker, meaning to say they look at the long picture. They will let Jews do mitzvos as long as the Yetzer Hara is confident it's not going to last. Meaning anything that's temporary, anything that's going to peter out, the Yetzer Hara says, go ahead, I'll get you later. So he says like this, the Yetzer Hara or the Kaichas of Tumah do not attack Avram, because Avram represents Chesed. So the Yetzer Hara says, let the Jews do Chesed, because I know Chesed without Torah is not going to pass to the next generation. It'll disappear. Let them do Avodah, let them build beautiful synagogues. It's not going to last. So the Yetzer Hara is perfectly happy to have Klal Yisrael be Isaac in Chesed without Torah, and to be Isaac in Avodah without Torah. Because even though they're short-term accomplishments, there is no long-term continuity. Masha'en came when it comes to Yaakov, who represents Torah. With Yaakov there is nitzchias. With Yaakov there is continuity. There's perpetuity. It'll be nimshach. That the Yetzer Hara has to fight. So the truth of the matter is, the Chafetz Chaim was not speaking about America in particular, but if you study the history of Jews in America, you actually see exactly this being borne out. Again, there have been Jews in America ever since the Revolutionary War and before the Revolutionary War. In fact, the Agav, it's not again here, but it's cute and interesting. They tell the story, it might be apocryphal, about an Orthodox soldier in the Revolutionary War. And the number of Orthodox Jews in America at the time of the Revolution, you could probably count on four hands. I mean, a very, very tiny number of people who were from, and what does from even mean? But whatever it is, the story goes that the American army was so impoverished they were sleeping outside. They didn't have blankets, so this guy was lighting a Hanukkah menorah outside. Halachically, by the way, that's a real shayla, but there was no tent. He lit, and George Washington walks by in the middle of the night, kind of like they say about the Chafetz Chaim, to cover people up with blankets or whatever it is. And he sees this guy with light. Now, Washington's first impulse was, he might be a spy, like they show lights to the Brits. So he said, what's going on? And the person said, no, this is our celebration of how we were able to fight the oppressor that stopped us from keeping our religion. And God gave us a light that pierced the darkness. And this apparently moved Washington very much because it gave him chizuk in the struggle that he had against the British, that the Americans were fighting against the British, that God will give them light and God will give them courage. So he thanked the person. He said, when this war is over, he says, where do you live? The guy lived in New York, in Manhattan. So he says, I want to visit you. Now, so the war was over. Washington didn't know he was going to be president, but he became first president of the United States. And the first capital of the United States was New York City, only for around a year. But Washington's inauguration was in New York. That's where it was. So after the inauguration, Washington was taking a walk. In those days, there was no Secret Service. The president would just walk on the street. And it happened to be Hanukkah, early January, whatever it was. And he sees a Hanukkah light burning in a window. And he knocks at the door, and it happens to be the same soldier, for the same person who had lit the menorah during the war a few years before that. And they actually reunited, and Washington said that, your candle lighting gave me a lot of a lot of chizuk, a lot of strength. Can anyone remind me why I started telling this story? I'm trying to remember what. Say again? America. Yeah. So here's the thing. So there have been American Jews ever since, but the big waves of immigration are three. One was before the Civil War, and that was mainly rich German families who were very assimilated. Either they were Reform or they were less than Reform, and they were very wealthy and educated. They founded a lot of the investment banking. Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, that comes from assimilated German population. Their big emphasis was on chesed organizations. They built Jewish hospitals, fraternal societies, burial societies. Their avodah, so to speak, was chesed. And what happened to most of their children? Most of their children actually converted. They became, not because they believed in Christianity, but because they thought they would. The way you get ahead was to just adopt the major religion, etc. So they're gone. There are no Jewish descendants. Now, the next wave of immigration was in the 1890s, after a bunch of very serious pogroms in Russia. There were pogroms in the 1890s, and many Jews left. And these were very poor Jews from Poland and Russia, and they were largely Orthodox, but they couldn't make a living. In fact, there was a lot of tension between the rich, assimilated German Jews and the poor, uneducated Polish, uneducated secularly, Polish Jews. In fact, the Germans were kind of embarrassed with those types of Jews. But be it as it may, they were largely religious, but their children totally left. So what did they do? They built shuls, they built synagogues, etc. And but the young generation didn't come. They were given freedom, they were given opportunity, and they saw how poor their parents were living, and they wanted to have a different way of life. So, in a sense, the first wave of immigration was chesed, and the second wave of immigration was avodah. And they built, the Polish-Russian communities built magnificent shuls. I remember growing up, they don't make shuls like this anymore. Big structures with stained glass windows. And what happened to those big structures with stained glass windows? They are all churches today. The Jewish community moved out to the suburbs. Who do you sell a shul to in an inner city? A church. Halachically, this is enormously problematical. It actually is usher. And they devised all sorts of shtick, like selling the shul to a third party who then, sold it to the church, whatever it would be. And to this day, go to Harlem, for example, in New York, or go even to Hartford, Connecticut. I can show you areas there. And you'll see magnificent synagogues that are all churches. But in the stonework, in the masonry, you can still see the engravings of Hebrew words like the Aseres and Dibros. And even sometimes the Shem Havaya, Rachmana litzlan, is engraved there. So what do you see? The Judaism of Chesed disappeared. The Judaism of Avodah disappeared. Now, to the extent there was any flourishing of Orthodoxy in America, still a long way to go, but there's certainly vibrancy. It came after World War II, where you had Aaron Cutler, and then before World War II you had Rav Shragel Fagel Mendlovich, and their passion was to create chinuch systems. Day schools on the elementary level, yeshiva high schools, batei medrash, kollel. And only with Limud HaTorah did you start getting a really strong, from community. Even whether it's modern Orthodox or Haredi, even in the modern Orthodox. People don't realize that many Orthodox rabbis in America before World War II were absolutely convinced that Orthodox Judaism was going to die. And they were the last generation. They said there's no way this is going to continue. There is no way. And in a sense, they were right, had it not been for the Ruach HaKodesh that inspired Rav Aaron and Rav Shragel Fagel Mendlovich to create an educational system. So this is, going back, this is exactly what the Chavetz Chaim is saying. That the Yiddishkeit based on chesed and the Yiddishkeit based on Avodah, and Kal V'chomer, the Yiddishkeit based on bagels and lox, or whatever it is, may have some nostalgia, but it doesn't have staying power. The new generation is going to find its own causes. But with Torah, a person realizes what's going on, what my purpose is, and that creates intergenerational continuity. And this is even if it's not even advanced Torah. For example, let's take intermarriage. Intermarriage in the United States is 7 out of 10. Can you believe this? 7 out of 10 marriages in which one person is a Jew, the other person is a guy. 7 out of 10. Unbelievable. But they say if a kid had even a day school education through 8th grade, he's no big Talmid Chacham. That cuts down, Nebuch, there's still a high interest, but that cuts it down to 40%. Now 40% is a tragedy. It's a big tragedy to be sure, but from 70 to 40, that's almost half. So you see that even a little bit of Jewish education makes a big nafkamina. And more Jewish education. Now I know that you're going to say, well, that's not, what's the great goal here? Baruch Hashem, the guy didn't marry a guy, but he still may be Mechal Shabbos. Okay, still. But not marrying a guy is a major step. It may be very little, so to speak, because there's so much more to being a Jew than not marrying a guy. That's not the sum total of a Yid. But it's a real important beginning that you establish a Jewish home. That's why people ask me all the time, their cousin is getting married to a non-religious woman, or their cousin's not religious, non-religious woman, they're not going to keep Taras HaMishpacha, should I go to the wedding? I always say, go to the wedding and dance at the wedding. Because if today a non-religious person marries a Jew, that is a cause of simcha, absolutely simcha. Because the probabilities are very, very great that wouldn't happen. So any marriage to a Jew to Jew, that is a great simcha, bizman hazeh. And you need to be mechazik it, you need to be there, you need to show that this is a great thing. So this is what the Vilna Gaon is saying, that your mitzvos have to be connected to Torah, otherwise it gets swept away. Now the second point is also based on what he said before, that your mitzvahs have to be connected to tikkun hamidos. Because if your midos are bad, then the mitzvos will not bring you closer to Hashem, because in the language of the Rambam, bad midos, this is the Rambam's language, are a mechitza. Mechitza means a wall. They separate you from Hashem. So with all of your learning, and with all of your mitzvos, midas ros, are blocking you from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore your tree is going to wither and die. Right? Look at the Dimion. Torah and Musar are the springs of water that feed the tree of your spiritual life. Without water, the tree is going to die, even though it may look like it's okay for a while. Right? Externally, it may look like it's okay already. So that's Sif Beis. Let's look at Sif Gimel. Torah mitzvahs yesh biyad ha'adam lahasigan avol yira v'ava penimis zeh ein biyad ha'adam v'umatas elikim ela kisha'adam eiseh shalai az Hashem lo yimna toiv lahelchem b'tamim. So this is a very interesting point, the Gemara says. Now, on one hand, we already made the point, going back to Sif Aleph, that Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, loving Hashem, revering Hashem, is the shleimus of your Avodah. Your mitzvos are still mitzvos, meaning they're worth something, but they are defective unless you combine it with Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. But says the Gra, Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are not really within my power. I can't will myself In other words, let's assume I don't have these strong emotions of Yiras Hashem or Avos Hashem. So what do? I tell myself, love God, fear God. If I don't have it, I don't have it. He says, it is actually not within your power. I'll mention in a minute, I think the Tanya is cholak in this, but the Gra says, Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem are not within your power to generate. Because Bechira generally cannot control feelings. Bechira, free will, controls actions. But it does not control feelings. So he says, what a person can choose to do is, I choose to learn Torah, I choose to do mitzvos. And even if it doesn't interest me, but if I know it's right, I choose. I cannot choose Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. This is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Gra says, Hashem will not withhold that gift to those who sincerely try to serve Him. So this is a great message of encouragement. People say, I'm not inspired when I daven, I'm not inspired when I learn. I don't feel Avos Hashem. I don't feel Yiras Hashem. So the Gra would say, keep on going, persevere. Do what is within the ambit of your Bechira, which is what? Learn Torah, do mitzvahs. And then Hashem will give you the Ava and the Yira as a gift, as a matana. Lo yimna toiv, v'hailchem b'samim. He will, that's a pasuk in Tehillim. He will not withhold goodness from those who walk in simple devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in the Sefer Tanya, remember Tanya has a few parts to Tanya. There are 5 chalakim in the book known as the Tanya. But the first part of Tanya, which by far is the biggest, it's 3/4 of the book, is the first chalak of Tanya. Tanya is not really the name of the book. It's only called Tanya because the first word of the Sefer is Tanya in Maseches Nida. But the name of the first part of Tanya, which is over 50 prakim, is called Sefer Shel Beinonim. It has 2 titles. Likutei Amarim, which means a collection of sayings. And that is probably going on all of the parts of Tanya. But Chelak Aleph of Tanya, which is by far the biggest part, is called the Book of Beinonim. So that's a little odd. Why would you call the book the Book of the Mediocre? Or the Book of the Middle Class? What exactly is the Musik of Beinoni? So the Alter Rebbe of Shneur Zalman has a very idiosyncratic definition of the term Tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni. The Rambam gives them kind of almost a quantitative definition. The Rambam says, if you have more mitzvos than Averos, you're a Tzaddik. If you have more Averos than mitzvos, you're a Rasha. And if you're 50-50, you're a Beinoni. And the Rambam says that it's not just pure counting mitzvos. Hashem assigns weight to mitzvos and weight to Averos. So one mitzvah may be worth 1,000 mitzvos, etc. Hashem has a grading system, a handicap system. But the Baal Tanya doesn't go with that definition. The Baal Tanya says that a Beinoni can encompass even the biggest tzaddik in the world can be a Beinoni. A Beinoni means someone who is living in the world of struggling with the Yetzer Hara. And even if he always makes the right decision, he's a Beinoni because he's in the world of struggle. Tzaddik is a very unusual thing. Tzaddik is a person who no longer struggles with the Yetzer Hara. And the Baal Tanya says, under his definition of tzaddik, it's not within your power to be a tzaddik. It's within your power to be a Beinoni that's mitzgaber on the Yetzer Hara. But to elevate yourself to where there's no struggle at all, that's a matana. So similar to what the Gemara is saying about Ava and Yira, the Baba Tanya says about a tzaddik. In fact, it's a little strange because it turns out, he actually says, the Eibishter gets more nachas from a Beinoni than from a tzaddik under this definition, because the Beinoni struggles and fights. The tzaddik doesn't fight. The question, of course, becomes, so what's the tachlis? Tzaddikim are very few, obviously. The tzaddik is very few. In fact, they paraphrase the Alter Rebbe as saying, tzaddikim are born, not made. You can't make yourself a tzaddik. You can make yourself a Beinoni that is menatseach over the Yetzer Hara. And that's the greatest accomplishment. A tzaddik is a matnas alikim. It's ka'ein olam haba in olam hazeh. So it's not. So what's interesting is the obvious question. So Tanya is called Sefer Shel Beinonim because it's a guidebook to those of us who are living a life of struggle, and that encompasses 99.999%. So the question becomes, what is the avodah? Okay, this is really a theoretical question because we don't really know anybody that would be a tzaddik under that definition. What's the avodah of a tzaddik? What's the purpose of a tzaddik? You know, the purpose of the Beinoni is to be a righteous person in the sense of conquering the Yetzer Hara. But the tzaddik doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. Either he didn't have it to begin with for whatever reason, or he killed it. So what is his tachlis? What is he supposed to do? So they say Chabad has a tradition that the Alter Rebbe wrote a companion book to the Tanya called Sefer Shel Tzadikim, and it got burnt. So we don't know. So again, maybe it's not so important for us because we're not holding there anyway, but there was such a musag of Sefer Shel Tzadikim. Now, then they even say there's a Sefer of Rishoyim. Rishoyim are people that are so far gone, they're beyond struggle, meaning the Ra has captured them so much that they can't even break away. So on this, Chabad has a Messiah that this is Likutei Maran. Rav Nachman of Breslov is the Sefer Shel Rishoyim. Now, your immediate gut reaction is, oh, Chabad is putting down. No, it's the other way around. They're saying Rav Nachman's Sfarim can drag even the guy who is so enmeshed in Ra that he feels he's hopeless. Rav Nachman will bring him up so he can become a Beinoni and learn Tanya. Right? So this is not an insult about Breslov. It's basically saying that Breslov is like, can save anybody, but then you got to move on to higher levels. Right? So the Likutei Maran is Sefer Shel Rishoyim, Chelek Aleph of Tanya is Sefer Shel Beinonim, and Sefer Shel Tzadikim is missing. You know, we don't have the Sefer Shel Tzadikim. But one of the things that the Tanya talks about a lot, and this Nikuda might be Chelek on the graph, is that he says, Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are already within your neshama. These are not things you have to learn, and these are not things you have to acquire. Within every neshama, there is a natural feeling of Ava and Yira to Hashem, but we don't always access it. Our conscious minds don't feel it. That's very, very true. But it's a reality that is within us. And the Baal HaTanya writes, that's why it will come out in extreme situations. He points out that we find throughout Jewish history that even people who were very far from serving Hashem, people who did Averos, people who said they were Apikorsim, would often be willing to die al Kiddush Hashem. They would die al Kiddush Hashem. Where does that come from? Because at some point, the intensity of feeling in your neshama bursts through the walls. It breaks down the walls. You didn't know you felt that way. But it's in there. It's in there. And therefore the Baal HaTanya says, through thought and meditation and learning and davening, you can break through some of the barriers to be margish. So again, I'm not sure. I mean, the Gra says it in a different way. The Gra says it is a gift that is impossible for you to do on your own. You need Hashem. But the Baal HaTanya seems to say it is a koach already within you that you can access by deep contemplation. So there may be a little bit of a machlokas here. You know, I think I told you before the story. One of the great lay leaders of American Jewry was Irving Bunim. Irving Bunim was a businessman. He was involved in rescuing the Jews during the Holocaust. And he was a very close confidant of Rav Aaron Kotler and the other Gedolim. They looked at him to negotiate with the government and the like. Irving Bunim. So during World War II, when Rav Aaron Kotler was already in America, he was trying to bring people over. So there were times that he went with Bunim even on Shabbos to meet with, they never met with Roosevelt, but to meet with cabinet members and the like. In fact, Bunim tells a story that, this was not Shabbos, but once they were going to Washington on Tisha B'Av. And Rav Aaron had cake on him. And Rav Aaron, of course, was fasting. But Rav Aaron said to Bunim, you know, you're going with a shlichus to the government. You have to be clear-minded. You can't be tired. You can't be exhausted. Rav Aaron said, I paskin that you can eat on Tisha B'Av, because this is a matter of pikuach nefesh. Not your pikuach nefesh, but Klal Yisrael, meaning if you're not effective in your presentation, that might cause Jews to die who would otherwise might be saved. So, pikuach nefesh is mechayiv. So Bunim said to Rav Aaron, he says, you know, Rebbe, I'm perfectly fine. I feel fine. I said I'll be able to do what I need to do. I don't have to eat. So Rav Aaron left him alone. So they went to Washington. They met. They had a long meeting. And then it's still the fast. It's towards the end of the fast. They're going back. And Bunim is absolutely exhausted. So he says to Rav Aaron, you know, maybe I'll take the cake now. So Rav Aaron says, it's Tisha B'Av, you know. He says, before the shlichus, I'll give you a heter. Now what? You're hungry? That's not a heter to eat on Tisha B'Av. But on one of the meetings they had was with Henry Morgenthau. Henry Morgenthau was the Secretary of Treasury under Franklin Roosevelt. And he was, indeed, from these assimilated German families that came over in before the Civil War. Wealthy, patrician, totally assimilated, not involved in Judaism at all. But they needed to talk to the Secretary of Treasury because he could authorize the release of money that could go. Remember, the Nazis, towards the end of the war, were taking bribes. In other words, they would release Jews in exchange for money. But it was against the law. You couldn't transfer money from America to an enemy. So they needed special rules, etc. So Morgenthau's initial position was, Bunim was explaining everything, what needed to be done. This could save people. This could save people who would die. We could get 20,000 Jews out of here if we pay these bribes. And Morgenthau initially started saying, well, you know, we're at war. The law is the law. I'm sworn to obey the Constitution and the laws. You can't ask me to break the law. So Rav Aaron said to Bunim in Yiddish, tell Morgenthau that he cares more about his job than the lives of other Jews. That's all he cares about is he doesn't lose his job. Now Bunim didn't want to say that to Morgenthau because, you know, I mean, he needs Morgenthau's help. He doesn't want to say, you know, you're a coward, you care more about your job and your money. So he just said, you know, the rabbi's very upset that you're not considering this. So Rav Aaron, even though Rav Aaron didn't know English, he understood that Bunim did not say what he said. So he pulls Bunim's coat. He said, say what I said exactly. So Bunim is very embarrassed. And Bunim says, the rabbi says that you care more about your job than the lives of Jews. And in order to keep your prestigious position, you don't care if 20,000 people die of your people. So Morgenthau writes that He took off his glasses. He put his head in his hands for 2 minutes. And then he said, you tell the rabbi that not only would I give up my job to save Jews, I would give up my life to save Jews. And he authorized, it was late in the war, so not as many people were saved as could have been saved, but he did authorize the release of funds, and thousands of Jews were saved. In fact, at the very end of the war, there were a few thousand Jews that were saved through that intervention that would have gone to Auschwitz, would have gone to concentration camps. So here you have a perfect example of what the Baal HaTanya talks about. You have a guy who had no connection. In fact, I believe he was intermarried, his kids were goyim. Anyway, he was not religious, he was not even a reform observance and the like. And yet, at some point he said he was willing to give his life in order to save Yidden, part of Klal Yisrael. This is what the Baal HaTanya says. It's in you. The Avas Hashem is within you. But we don't always access it. But every once in a while, it becomes so powerful that it breaks through. And therefore, even the sinners of Israel are willing to be moser nefesh al kiddush Hashem. They tell a story in the Holocaust that when the Nazis came into a certain town, and this is probably a story that you can have 100 of them, but this is one particular story. So there was a barber, a Jewish barber in town, who was a Machal Shabbos B'Farhesia. He actually kept his barber shop open on Shabbos. There were no Jews who went. The rest of the Jews were from, but whatever, he serviced the non-Jewish population. And Mamish Lahachis, Barabin B'Farhesia, he's Machal Shabbos. So when the Nazis rounded up the Jews of that little town and they were going to execute them, so they first wanted to desecrate a Sefer Torah. And they took out the Sefer Torah, they threw it on the ground, they rolled it open, and they told this barber, because they knew he didn't care, they wanted him to trample on the Torah, to jump on the Torah, trample on the Torah. And the barber said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to trample on the Torah. And they told him that we're going to kill you unless you do it. And he says, I don't care. I'm not going to trample on the Torah. And he died along with everybody else. But again, where does that come from? He was somebody who was so rachak from everything. But this is what's called the Pintel Yid, the spark of the Jew. Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. So I think this may be a different perspective. The Gra seems to be saying here that Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are the reward that Hashem gives you for doing mitzvahs. You can't really have it on your own, but Hashem will not hold back from you. Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, if you sincerely try to serve Him. But the Baal HaTanya seems to approach it a different way. You don't have to get it. It is already within you. And this is the makor of a Yid who is willing to give his life al Kiddush Hashem. Okay. And now indeed, in Sif Dalet, we'll just begin this. He says the same thing. Kol ratzain v'avo devekus makabel adam ilmayla. The yearning and the love and the sense of attachment to God, that doesn't come from you, the Gra says. That is the gift God gives you when you try to serve Him. Toli hakol b'yadam. Initially, the person has to make the choices of Torah and Mitzvos, which will open up the floodgates. Mikol makayim tzarich lekabel mamala, but then you have to get it from above. Raka hachana toli b'yadam. But to prepare yourself is up to you. V'harausa, but the love then comes milmala, Kafi erech o avaida, according to the effort that you put in. V'zeh sha'amru, and the Gra says, this is the meaning of the pasuk. Interesting. It's a pasuk. V'hiskadishtem, you shall sanctify yourself. V'hayisem kedashim, and you will become holy. It's a pasuk. So what's the repetition? You shall make yourself holy, and you will become holy. So the Gra says, it fits what he says very, very nicely. You make yourself holy by the exercise of your bechira to do Torah and mitzvos, because that's within your. But the Avas Hashem, the Yiras Hashem, the Deveikus, that cannot be created by your effort. But that is the gift that Hashem gives you, based on your service to Him. So, by making yourself holy, you make yourself a vessel to be makabel Hashem's divine shefa, and then the divine shefa is not you anymore. It comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the matana that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. Now, the Ramchal in Mesilas Yesharim says an idea that's a little similar to this, and of course you know that the Ramchal was nifter before the Gra, but the Gra greatly was machshav the Ramchal. The Gra in Kabbalah as well. The Gra said if the Ramchal would be alive, the Gra would leave Vilna and walk to Amsterdam, where the Ramchal lived before he came to Eretz Yisrael, to learn from the Ramchal. And in fact, what is it? The Gra is a famous for it. People are still trying to figure out. In Mesilas Yesharim, there is not a single extra word until Perek Yud Aleph. So, obviously, people want it. Armafalpel. What is the extra word in Mesilas Yesharim that the Gra said is in Perek Yud Aleph? Like, what's the extra word? So people are debating about what's the extra word and the like. But he said that's how Medayak the Ramchal was. But you know, the Ramchal's Sefer, Mesilas Yesharim, is based on a brisa in Maseches Avodah Zarah of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, who discusses different levels. You start with A and you go to B. Zehiras, being careful in the mitzvahs, brings you to Zerizas. Different levels. The highest level is Kedusha. So the Mesilas Yesharim is a guidebook how to go from Zehiras all the way to Kedusha, which then leads to Tchias HaMesim and Nevuah, but he doesn't explain those levels. Those are the super levels. But the highest level is Kedusha. Now, just to give you an example of how high a level the Mesilas Yesharim is pitched at, let's take the lowest level, Zehiras. That's the lowest level. Zehiras means you keep Kol HaTorah Kula B'chlal U'Befrat. That's the starting thing. And then we go from there. So a person might wonder, so why on earth am I learning Mesilas Yesharim at least beyond the first Perek? How can I go to the second Perek if I don't do the first Perek? But the answer is that's not totally emes, because there are bits and pieces of every madrega that you can incorporate. In other words, it's not that, the second level has no relevance to you until you complete the first level. That's not emes. If I did a little bit on the first, I can do a little bit of the second. But Eino Chinami, the Shleimus is only if you master each level. So when he describes Kedusha, he uses this phrase. He says, Tchilaso Aveda v'soifai matana. The beginning of Kedusha is still your work, but then Hashem gives you a matana that's beyond your ability. It's kind of the gift that Hashem gives you in recognition of your effort. Now the Gra is describing this not in reference to just Kedusha. He's describing Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem that way always. But it's the same getter, that there are things in life that are really beyond our madrega. They're beyond our madrega. But they're a matana from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the avodah that we put in. It's like a famous mashal they say about a king that constructed a tower, and the tower had 1,000 stories. And he said, whoever climbs to the top of the tower in one afternoon gets to marry my daughter. So most people didn't even try. I mean, I'm not going to climb 1,000 stories in one afternoon. I can't do it. But one fellow tried to do it. So he goes up 10 stories, 20 stories. Already, it's out of breath. 20 stories is a lot of stories. So people are laughing at him. You know, what on earth are you doing? You have 980 stories left. This is stupid. He goes 30, goes 40. By the 50th story, he's on the verge of collapse. He collapses on the landing, and the landing turns into an express elevator that takes him all the way to the top. This is a very, very good mashal for tshuva, because the idea was to work on ourselves, to reach these madregas of Kedusha are really beyond us. They are beyond us. But we sometimes think if they're beyond us, why start? But then you don't realize you do as much as you're able to do, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes over. But if you don't do as much as you were able to do, then nothing happens. The people who didn't bother to go to the 50th level don't get the elevator. So that's what the Gra means, that Avashem and Yerushalayim are not beyond the person to be masik, but it's a matnas elikim, and that's what the Mesilas Yesharim says. The madrega of Kedusha starts bi'avoda, but it ends in matana. You reach levels that are really totally beyond you, but they're the matana that Hashem gives because you did the best you can. Okay, B'ez Hashem, we should be zayich. Have a good